Well, thanks to everybody for coming tonight. And we're going to do the age of the earth. And we're going to cover some important topics like how they got 6,000 years from the Bible. And this is what we did last month. Steve and I went down to Northwestern and we saw Mike Snavely speak. And he did some incredible talks. He filled up the seats, and I asked him at Arches National Park, did you ask to see a dinosaur that was carved into the rock? And he said no. It was at Natural Bridges National Monument. He called him up and he wanted to see when the best time to take a picture of this dinosaur would be. And the receptionist wouldn't tell him. And so she said, you have to talk to the lead ranger. And then the lead ranger said, he's talking to him and he said, that artifact can best be photographed at 1:30 in the afternoon. And then he said, I've exceeded my authority. And Mike says, well, what do you mean he exceeded your authority? And he said, that's a level 3 artifact. He said, what's level 3? And he said, well, level 1 is where we tell people about it. Level 2 is we'll tell them about it if they ask about it. But level 3 is when we have to pretend it doesn't exist. So that's our tax money, pretending this doesn't exist and keeping information from us. And that was at the University of Northwestern last month. And this month they've got Steve Law coming in. Anybody see the patterns of evidence? Anybody ever seen that? Yeah, well, Steve Law, he helped make that one. And this is the trailer for it.
I'm investigative filmmaker Tim Mahoney, and my investigation continues for the true location of Mount Sinai. Follow me and Exodus Explorers on a search for more biblical evidence.
These are the 12 stones?
Yes.
1, 2, 3, 4.
At this place, something very important happened.
There was so much evidence. It felt like I walked into something that was 3,500 years old, undisturbed.
The characteristics of Mount Sinai described in the Bible match the characteristics of a volcano exactly.
How could Moses have ascended a mountain into an active volcanic eruption?
When Moses fled, he went to Midian. Why haven't scholars looked in Midian in Saudi Arabia?
Because they can't. That's why.
What risk would these Exodus Explorers be willing to take to prove the Bible?
After 5 years, he made a desperate decision.
Yes, he made a desperate decision.
That just kind of poisoned the well for everyone else doing to do scientific work in the area. And they put fences up and keep people away.
This Jeep roared up and 3 desert policemen jumped out. And these guys are waving these AK-47s right in the faces of my children and just screaming, get out of here.
We can't get into the area, but we can see what we need to see through the fence.
They stumbled upon something that was pretty unique.
Is this the holy altar where God made a covenant with the nation of Israel?
If they didn't use it for sacrificing animals, what else would you use it for?
Once I realized what this site was, I dropped to my knees.
Have they found the mountain of God where Moses received the 10 Commandments?
Why would you go to church every week? Why would you pray? Why would you look forward to the future if the whole foundation of what you are doing this for is fiction?
This is some of the most amazing, awe-inspiring, foundational, miraculous acts of the Lord throughout the entire Scriptures.
Join me as I conclude my 20-year search for which mountain best matches the biblical event in Patterns of Evidence, Journey to Mount Sinai, Part 2.
And that's Tuesday night. Tuesday night, you can Zoom that. You go into tccsa.tc, you can ask for the Zoom link. And if you don't want to go all the way to Northwestern, I'm going to be at Northwestern. I've got a table there from 10 until 5 talking to the students about it, so they know about it. And then I'm going to eat with them at 5 and just have a blast. But that's Tuesday, and Bobby's son was up. He climbed Mount Sinai, and he said you pick up rocks are black on top, but then you pick them up and they're not black underneath. And so that was with In Grace TV, I believe it is, In Grace TV. But yeah, so that Mount Sinai, there's so much information coming about. I highly recommend it. If you can get that Zoom link, I think you'll like it. And we're going to try to YouTube Live it also. I hope that goes better than my Facebook Live. But that's next Tuesday. And then the day after that, we've got the Ark in the Darkness. This is a Fathom event around the country, and it's Wednesday and Thursday, and this is the trailer for it.
Have you ever wondered what the world was like before the Great Deluge? Giants roaming in paradise, thriving before the judgment wiped them all away, leaving behind stretchy tissues we find in their bones today, along with other clues around the world that the flood really wasn't that long ago. Did the ancient ones who lived at this time really live for hundreds of years? Maybe the truth about Earth history is more eye-opening than you can imagine.
So that's Wednesday and Thursday, and so they do a caveat. They do talk about the plate tectonics, catastrophic plate tectonics. I do disagree with it, but like anything else, just eat the meat and spit out the bones. And if there's Christians making videos, I think we should support them. And then the last but not least, you can have a creation vacation. May 3rd, 4th, and 5th at the Living Waters Bible Camp down by Westby, Wisconsin, and Dr. Randy Galuza is going to speak. And there's something for the whole family, something for every age. And you're going to have like hay rides and stargazings and tractor rides, and it's just a lot of fun. It's 3 days and 2 nights for $95, including your meals. Plus, you get to meet Dr. Randy Galuza, which is worth the price of admission right there. He's excellent. And then there was a bombshell that dropped last month. Carl Werner, he's the guy who did the Grand Experiments, Evolution, Living Fossils. He just, he was an evolutionist, and he tried to prove evolution true, and he became a creationist. That's another talk and another time. But it took him about 15 years or so. He traveled around the world to talk to these human fossil experts and asked if he could photograph their fossils, and then also if he could interview them. And that's what he did. And he claims he found 150 cases of fraud. Not mistakes, misinterpretation, outright frauds. They knew it was wrong and they presented it anyway. And so I encourage people, if you go into my Facebook page, you scroll down a bit and you'll be able to hear this half-hour interview. And I got the videos too. That might be next month's talk. But it's all crumbling. And this is a trailer for that.
Coming up, these 6 scientists produced compelling evidence that humans evolved from apes. But the information they provided the public was fraudulent. They made false statements, withheld facts, or altered fossils in order to make their case for ape men. Now, for the first time, their 20 acts of fraud will be revealed to the public.
Yeah, and it's even more than that. It's pretty eye-dropping, jaw-dropping. But if evolution's true, why not make frauds? Why not lie? What's wrong with that? If evolution's true. And this is what kind of motivates me to keep going, is you have people talking like this.
We are going to become gods. Period. If you don't like it, get off. You don't have to contribute. You don't have to participate. But if you're going to interfere with me becoming God, you're going to have big trouble. And we'll have warfare.
Yeah, isn't that kind of scary? And I blew the whistle on people like this 2 years ago. Prepare for the battle. That's Yuval Harari up there. He thinks we're hackable animals. And you go into his website, ynharari.com, and you see the very first page. History began when humans invented gods and will end when humans become gods. And I look at the world and it's like it's a mess, because there's a battle between God's truth and Satan's lies in almost every area. And ground zero for that battle is creation versus evolution. Because when they reject God, the Creator, now pretty much anything goes. And so that's what motivates me to go to St. Cloud State and try and reach the students. And that's what I was doing. I had Real Science Radio. There's the thing over there. I used to go there and sit at a table at the busiest door and prepare these talks. And I had a little sign in front of me like, where are you going when your heart stops, or something like that. And then they took that table away. So now I go outside and I play a bunch of creation stuff on the speaker and I talk to the students. And 3 weeks ago, there's a student that flipped me off. And then I said, hey, I'm just trying to give you all the information so you can think for yourself. And I think you're not a mutated animal like the textbook says. And then last week, or 2 weeks ago, he apologized for flipping me off. Yeah, that was good for him. And then a day after that, we had a half-hour conversation with another girl. And so I just like to ask questions that are unanswerable. And I asked this question twice, once today and once yesterday at the community college. I said, hey, we have vital organs. We can't live without them, right? And they say, yeah. And I said, well, how did we live before we evolved them? You know, how did we live before they came? And so if hopefully those questions like, where did the matter come from? How did life begin? Hopefully it wakes them up at night and they think about it. Because the subconscious, if a question's not answered properly, it doesn't go away. And so on Tuesday, I was at the vocational school with my question of the day, how old is the earth? And it ended up, it was millions and billions was 56, and 9 people thought thousands. But it was a really good icebreaker, because when they'd vote, I'd ask them, well, why did you put it there? And they'd say, well, it's in the textbook. And I said, yeah, I know it's in the textbooks, but what do you think that number's based upon? And then we get them to think, and I'll say, you know, when something happens, not really a science question, that's a history question. You know, and it's a history, and what's your perspective of the past? Is it a blind chance? Everything got here by blind chance, like the Big Bang and evolution? Or is there a designer in your past? And so then we talk about that. Can you guys hear me okay in the back? Thumbs up? Okay, good. Good. And so then I was at St. Cloud State today. I could have been polishing up the talk and all that stuff, but the weather was nice, so I went to St. Cloud State and did the same thing. Had some good conversations, and at the at the community college, there's about 14 people that signed up to know when these events are. And today there was probably 3 or 4. And that one was pretty much a landslide for billions and millions. That was 39-4 when it was all done, actually 41. But it was interesting, you know, I enjoy it there. And quick review, this is a Creation Science 101 series that we're doing right now. In the very first talk, we had creation basics. And a quick review, we looked at the 2 histories, which I just did. One's based on blind chance and one's based on creation. And then 2 frameworks, and we realized that the creationists are making accurate predictions, and the blind chancers aren't. And then 2 definitions. And this is really key in this, science. I hear people say, I believe in science, not religion. Okay? And so I say, well, what do you mean by science? And get them to the point where science is observation and testing. And evolution and the Big Bang are not observable and they're not testable, therefore they're not science. So they're both belief systems, and we get to that point. And then the next definition is evolution. And the guy says, well, we can observe evolution. It's like, yeah, that's variation within a kind. Dogs evolve into dogs. You know, bacteria evolves into bacteria. That's not the fish evolving into fishermen. So you have to define that term also. And then we looked at the laws of physics and realized if you don't have a creator, now you got to break a lot of laws of physics to get us here. And like the first and second law of thermodynamics. And then we looked at logical fallacies. All the scientists believe this. Well, yeah, they better, or they're going to get fired, you know. And by the way, they don't all believe that. But that's all in CS 101. That's on my YouTube channel, Solidify Your Faith. And then CS 102 is where you can get equipped for this battle. It's called Good Fishing Holes for Creation. You know, if I give you a fish, you can eat for a day. But if I teach you to fish, you can eat for a lifetime. And here's some really good fishing holes where you can dive in deep. And they're easy. A lot of 1- and 2-minute videos that get you up to speed on a certain topic. And like I really enjoy Real Science Radio. That's a little more in depth, but ICR and Reasons for Hope, they've got some really good ones. So you can go into CS 102, and there's one for kids and there's one for adults. This brings us to Creation Science 103. How old is the Earth? And before we dive into that, did anybody have a birthday last month? Anybody have? Yay, Michael. How old were you? 30. How do you know you were 30? You were born 30 years ago, but how do you know that? You don't know? Anybody? Like, did your parents tell you were 30? What? Birth certificate, a historical document. And I suppose your parents told you that too. Well, how would they know? They were there, right? See, when something happened, again, it's not a science question, it's a history question, and the best way to determine it, I don't know, is there a test you could do to figure out that you're 30 and when your birthday is? No, it's not a science question, it's a history question. So what we need is somebody who's been there, who's reliable, and an historical document. And I submit to you that God was there, He told us what He did, and the Bible is a historical document. And we're going to, oh, by the way, happy birthday. Yeah, we appreciate that. Yeah. And so we got these two views of history, and I'm going to show you something that I've never seen anybody do in 20 years. This is where you might want to take out a pen. Usually I say put them down. But I'm going to give you some verses that get you from Adam to Jesus and to now, and with 6,000 years. Because when you go into answers in Genesis and you try to figure out how old is the earth, this is what they say. Adam to Abraham, we get about 2,000 years. You know, that's what the genealogies. That's really simple. I can do that. But how do you get to Jesus from there? And then they just say, most scholars would agree that Abraham lived about 2000 BC. That's a big jump, 2,000 years. And I was never satisfied with that. And then you go into ICR and try and figure it out. How old is the earth according to the Bible? It says, to calculate the date, one must first employ the genealogical data given in Genesis, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, the Gospels, and elsewhere. Information gleaned from Judges, 1st and 2nd Kings, Daniel, Acts, and other books must be included as well. Obviously, the job is difficult. Yeah, I guess it would be difficult if you had to do all that, but in 5 minutes you're going to have a framework that's going to be a lot simpler than what he said. You go into Genesis 5, and it's got the genealogies. You know, Adam lived 130 years and begat a son and called him Seth. So you take 130. And then you add it, Seth lived 105 and begat Enos. So 130 plus 105. And then Enos lived 90 years and begat Canaan. And then you add 90 to that. I did it on a spreadsheet. But then you get down to Abram, really easy. And then you got to figure out the last couple of ones. So then another verse, and you do that in Genesis 5 and 11. Those where the two genealogies are. And then you had to figure out when Abraham was, when Isaac was born. So this is Genesis 21:5. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born. Okay, so how old was Isaac when Jacob was born? That was in Genesis 25:26. And that says that Isaac was 70 years old, okay, when Jacob was born. So that's 60. Okay, and so how old was Jacob when his sons were born? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all because he goes into Egypt when he's 130. Okay, so, and Jacob said unto Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers and the days of their pilgrimage. So what's he telling Pharaoh? It's like, I'm 130, but that's nothing compared to my forefathers. That's what he's telling them. So when you graph this out, you know, that big blue line, that's the flood. But what's never occurred to me in 20 years is Shem outlived Abraham. How in the world did he do that? Shem outlived Abraham, who was his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandson. And I think it has to do with he was developed in the perfect environment. When he was in his mother's womb, there was more oxygen. It was the perfect environment. He got everything he needed to live a long life. But then after the flood, it's not the perfect environment. You know, we used to have 30-some% oxygen according to amber bubbles, and now we got 20% or 21%. So it's a different environment. So I think that's why he lived longer. And there is a, you know, I've covered this on my talks. It's like the creation week or the first 6 days. That's on my YouTube channel. If you can't find it, just put a Facebook message and I'll get it to you. And then, okay, so this is my spreadsheet. Okay, you got all those years. You get down to Jacob. He was 130. He goes into Egypt. And that's about 2,238 years after Adam. Okay, 2238. So how long were they in Egypt? Now write down, this is Exodus 12:40. It says that he was in Egypt for 430 years. Okay, the sojournings of the children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. So you take 2238 plus 430, you get 2668. Well, what happened after the Exodus? Once they left, this is a real key verse. And this is the one that my wife pointed out to me. And it said, it came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month of Ziph, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of the Lord. So 480 years after they left Egypt, they began to build the house of the Lord, and that was in the 4th year of Solomon's reign. Okay? And so you got 480 years after that. So now it brings us to the kings. So now we can add up the years of the kings in Judah. And so we can do that, how long they ruled. And this is going to be 1 Kings 6:1 to all the way through 2 Kings 25:30, where you can see how long they reigned. And there was a couple of them that only reigned 3 months, so I didn't put them in there till the very end, and I called it 1 year. And they ruled for 430 years, roughly. But that's not important. What's important is when Nebuchadnezzar came on the scene. And Nebuchadnezzar, he came on the scene in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar. That's a key verse. And I asked my wife, where's that? And without batting an eye, she said, Jeremiah 25:1. You know, I was searching around trying to find where that was. She said, Jeremiah 25:1. So I go there, it's like, there it is. Jeremiah 25:1. The word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, the king of Judah, that was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar. That's a key verse, because that ties a Bible character with in the secular timeline. And she knew it on the back of her head, or just at the top of her head, because she cross-referenced a Bible for every one of her siblings last year, and her parents. So not only did she read it, and she cross-referenced, so she's read the Bible probably 10, 12 times since the last year. And so she knows it inside and out. And so, Jeremiah 25:1. You know, it's just, so she's like the researcher. You know, she's the microscope. I'm like the megaphone. It's like, hey, look at what's this is happening. Then she looked up in the Southwest Handbook, page 82, that 605 to 562. So you got Nebuchadnezzar from 605 BC, and that ties it up to Jesus. And then we looked on Britannica.com, and it said that he started to reign at 605 to 561 BCE. Anybody know what BCE stands for? Before Common Era. Yeah, they changed BC to BCE, so in a couple of generations, our kids aren't going to know what BC stands for. So it's very important that we let them know what the truth is. And so there's the timeline. So you just add all that together, and we'll do that right at the end. These are the key verses, or the key numbers. You know, we got Genesis 1. It's 238 years Jacob enters Egypt. That's Genesis 5:11, 21:5, 21:6, 26, and 47:9. 430 years in Egypt. That was Exodus 12, 40, and 41. And then 480 years until the start of the building of the temple. That's 1 Kings 6:1. And then 412 years of the kings until Nebuchadnezzar. And the key verse there is that starts in 1 Kings 6:1 to 2 Kings all the way through. And then that key is Jeremiah 25:1. And then you got Nebuchadnezzar there. And then you jump to the secular timeline, which is 605 BC. And you crunch all those numbers, and you get roughly 6,189 years after creation. And I'm not a Bible scholar, so I could be wrong. But this is a pretty good framework to go with, I think. And it's a little bit different than what ICR got. And so I did all this number crunching, and then I jumped into, not ICR, it would have been creation.com. They did pretty much the same thing we did. The Bible's history giving us the answer to the age of the earth. And they did pretty much the same thing. Theirs is on the left, mine is on the right. We have different numbers at the bottom. They got 2298, I got 2238. And that's because we have different ages for Terah when Abram was born. And I'm not sure why that is. I'm not sure where they got 130, but they're probably right. I just threw it together. So it's a pretty good timeline. And then, but they don't go to Nebuchadnezzar. They go to the exile when Israel went into exile. They think that was 586 BC. So they're going to an event. I'm going to a person, and so their timeline is 6150 plus or minus 50 years, and that was 11 years ago. So it might be 6161 by now. But that's right. It's in the ballpark. So now you've got what the Bible says about 6,000 years. And again, I've been watching this for 20 years, and I've never seen anybody do that. So that's worth the price of admission right there. Right there. So I can show people from the Bible how you get 6,000. Okay, but that's not what the blind chancers do. They've got the timeline that says that the universe, we got everything, 11.4 to 13.8 billion years is how long the universe has been here. That's a big range there. You know, just think if you were wrong by 20% on your age. You know, especially when you get big numbers by that. But how do they figure that out? Well, according to phys.org, study finds the universe might be 2 billion years younger. That's a 20% drop. So how did they do that? Well, scientists estimate the age of the universe by using the movement of stars to measure how fast it is expanding. So they look at the stars moving farther away from us, and they run the movie backwards, and they figure it's 13.8 billion years. But what they don't tell you is the rate of expansion is accelerating. It's getting faster, and they can't explain it with blind chance. And so they have to have a rescuing device. That's what they imagine to be true, so they don't have to give their faith in the Big Bang. So they imagine that there's dark energy out there. Dark energy, it's never been observed, it's never been, they think it's like anti-gravity that's making the acceleration go. But that same observation in the stars moving apart, that could be the same thing as in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, and he stretched out the heavens. It's the same observation. Okay, and it goes down to say that a generally accepted age of the universe is 13.7 billion years based on a Hubble constant of 70. So whatever that Hubble constant is, when you have 70, you get 13.7 billion years. But these guys found a Hubble constant of 82.4. So now they're at 11.4 billion. And then there's other guys who found a constant of 67 and 74 and 73. So it's not an exact science. And yesterday I gave this talk at the community college, The Age of the Earth. The same talk, but I didn't open the Bible. It's all science. And you can see that talk maybe on my YouTube channel. But it's based on this article. It's creation.com, 101 evidences for a young age of the earth and the universe. So if you want to dip into the science, that's going to be hopefully up on YouTube. We Facebook Lived it, but we had troubles with that one too. Okay, so how did scientists calculate the age of the earth? Now this tells us that they use the age of the rock is determined by radiometric dating. They look at the rocks and that tells us the age of the earth. With radiometric dating, there's huge problems. There's 3 unknowable assumptions. They don't know the original condition of the rock, they don't know if the decay rate's been constant, and they don't know if it's been contaminated by, guess what? Water. It can wash elements in and out. That's why we don't have lead pipes. But this article is actually honest enough to say, but hey, there's a problem. During the rock cycle, rocks are constantly changing between forms, going back and forth from igneous to metamorphic to sedimentary. Old rocks may even be destroyed as they slide back into the Earth's mantle. And that's another rescuing device. Earth's going back into the mantle. That's to support the plate tectonics and catastrophic plate tectonics. You don't observe it, but you can imagine it. But so what they really want are meteorites or moon rocks. And by the way, does anybody know where the oldest Earth rock has been found? Anybody know? They found it 50 years ago. Yes? Granite Falls? Nope, not Granite Falls.
I guess Antarctica?
Nope, not Antarctica. According to NASA, Earth's oldest rock was found on the moon. The moon. How in the world does a rock from Earth get on the moon? And not only that, the rock was crystallized about 20 kilometers beneath Earth's surface. So 10 Ks are 6 miles, so 12 or 13 miles below the surface, the rock crystallized and ended up on the moon. It doesn't make any sense from a blind chance perspective. But if you know what the hydroplate theory is, it's going to make perfect sense. I gave a talk in November at Northwestern. And the first question was, and it wasn't about the hydroplate, it was God's clues. And he said, what's the hydroplate? And it's a 300-page book, 400. Now it's up to 600. And so I explained it in 5 minutes, the best I could. So if you go into my Solidify Your Faith page on Facebook and scroll down and take 5 minutes, you will understand how a rock formed 12 miles under the surface and ends up on the moon. It'll make perfect sense to you. And if you're interested in more of that, I did an hour talk on it at St. Cloud State. It's called Answers to Scientific Problems. This is on my YouTube channel. And if that whets your appetite and you want more information, the very first hydroplate conference was last September online. And we had 3 PhD scientists talking, and one of them was from the U.S. Air Force Academy. So we had some big hitters stepping up to the microphone. And this one's on Rumble. They have YouTube, or this one's on YouTube. Search Hydroplate Conference on Rumble and YouTube, or else just go to hydroplate.org. And if you can only listen to one talk, listen to the comet talk. And about halfway through, Kevin Lee clearly predicts what they'd find in an asteroid and a comet. And he was right from a biblical perspective. And the blind chance NASA was wrong both times. So that's we got a lot of high ground right now, and that's why I'm blowing the horn as much as I can to get people look at this before NASA makes another blunder. Okay, but how did the Earth get here? This is a St. Cloud State textbook. You can see it right down there, and it's on page 22. Go down to the bottom paragraph, or the underneath the bottom one. It says the origin of the geosphere is the story of the birth of our planet. The story begins. So that whole book is a story. It's not science. It's a story. That's a big fuzzy word, and if you miss it at the beginning, you're going to think you're being taught science. And I met a biology instructor in Virginia, and he said he always has his students have a journal of fuzzy words, like probably, might have, could have, speculate. And this is the classic fuzzy word from the St. Cloud State textbook. I have a copy of it here. Somehow, despite the harsh environment, living organisms appeared. Somehow. See, the problem with our textbooks is we have fuzzy words like this in it. We aren't teaching science, which is observation and testing. Okay, so again, the three problems with radiometric dating: we don't know the original condition of the rock. There could be some daughter element in it. And also we don't know if it was a constant rate of decay, and we don't know if there was any contamination. And one experiment is worth 1,000 expert opinions. So let's just see how well they do with their carbon dating and their radiometric dating. They found fossil wood from a quarry that tested at 20,000 years carbon date, but the rock in which they found it is supposed to be 183 million years old. There's a problem with the dating. Then they found diamonds that should be billions of years old, right? But they carbon dated at 57,000. And the rocks that they find them in are supposed to be 1 or 2 billion years old. So there's a problem. And my favorite one is Mount St. Helens. They took some lava from the dome after it had erupted, and they sent it to a lab and said, how old is the lava? We think it's rather young. And they got dates back 350,000 years to 2.8 million years. And the correct answer was 10. So there's problems. And yesterday I went through a whole list of layers, lava that we knew when it erupted, so we knew the age of the rock, and all the millions of years bad dates for it. And that's in yesterday's talk. We threw that out so we could squeeze in the Bible. But we're just real quickly going to see what some PhDs from Answers in Genesis have to say. Evidence for a young earth and creation. This is at answersingenesis.org, so you can go in there and check the sources for yourself. Number one, very little sediment in the seafloor. It accumulates this amount in less than 12 million years, not billions. But there's rescuing devices that say, well, the seafloor sediment must have accumulated at a much slower rate in the past. So they have to imagine that. That's not what we see, but they have to imagine that. And then number two, bent rock layers. Rock layers thousands of feet thick have been bent and folded without fracturing. Yeah, and that's what Mike Snavely, he showed in his video, The Horrors of the Flood. Just had some incredible footage of that. Look at that. That rock layer is bent 90 degrees. How in the world do you do that without breaking it? Flying chancers can't do that. But they have a rescuing device that says heat and pressure can make hard rock layers pliable. Yeah, well, that heat and pressure will also turn it into another type of stone. Just one problem. The heat and pressure would have transformed these layers into quartzite, marble, and other metamorphic rocks. Tibet sandstone is still sandstone. It wasn't heat. There wasn't any pressure. Number three, soft tissue and fossils. This is my favorite. We've got this Creation Research Quarterly. They found blood cells in dinosaur bone 15 years ago, and a lot of scientists don't even know about it. They swept it under the rug really well, but they found blood cells and blood vessels, and now they're finding nerves, and those can't last millions of years. And so their rescuing device, they don't really have one. They just imagine one's there. This goes on to say that the presence of actual undecayed tissue and fossils found at virtually every level of the geologic column completely undermines evolution's deep time paradigm. Completely. They find it wherever they look in that column. And that's what Bob Enyart predicted. He said you're going to find soft tissue in any one of those layers. It doesn't matter because that's evidence of a flood, not millions of years. And that's what they're finding. But to get around that, they don't have a rescuing device. They just hope they'll find it. They conclude that there is some previously unrecognized form of fossilization that preserves cells and protein fragments over tens of millions of years. So they imagine that it's out there, but they don't know what it is. And they just will not change the age of the dinosaurs. Because if they do, that whole evolution paradigm comes crashing down. Because if you don't have millions of years to hide that evolutionary fantasy in, it's going to be pretty apparent and nobody will believe it. Okay, number five, the faint sun paradox. As hydrogen fuses, it should change the composition of the sun's core, gradually increasing the sun's temperature. If true, this means that the Earth was colder in the past. In fact, the Earth would have been below freezing 3.5 billion years ago when life supposedly evolved. Somehow, remember somehow? You know, it's supposed to be hot molten blobs. And so the early Earth would have been fainter, and it would have only been about 31 degrees. So the rescuing device is, hey, there was greenhouse gas back then that trapped that faint little heat that they had. And so greenhouse gases in the early Earth's history would retain more heat, but this means that the greenhouse gases had to decrease gradually to compensate for the brightening sun. It is difficult to believe that a mechanism so totally unrelated to the sun's brightness could compensate for the sun's changing emission so precisely for billions of years. So that's quite a rescuing device. Number 5, rapidly decaying magnetic field. And there's a book out there by John Morris. He thinks this is the best evidence for a young Earth because they've been measuring it since 1845 and the decaying rate at 5% per century. And it's got a half-life every 1,465 years. Okay, so that means 1,465 years ago, the magnetic field was twice as strong. And 1,400 years before that, it was 4 times as strong. And 1,400 years before that, it was 8 times as strong. And he says you can only do that so far before, this is what he says, until about 10,000 years ago, it would have been so strong the planet would have disintegrated. Its metallic core would have separated from its mantle. The only conclusion we can have is that it's fewer than 10,000 years old. I've heard another guy say that 20,000 years it would have been a neutron star. So we cannot be here millions of years. But the rescuing device is there's a dynamo that's generating this magnetic field. Okay, well then why is it decreasing? You know, why is it always decreasing? The dynamo model, but the model contradicts some basic laws of physics. And here's something to think about. Iron stops being magnetic at 1,400 degrees Fahrenheit. That might have something to do with it. But so there's a lot of problems, a lot of rescuing devices, and just keep in mind who's making all these rescuing devices up. Number 6, helium and radioactive rocks. Helium diffuses so rapidly that all the helium should have leaked out in less than 10,000 years. So why are these rocks still full of helium? It's because they're not that old. But the rescuing devices, somehow it got trapped in there. Zircon crystals must have stopped the helium from leaking out, but they're wedged flat. There's nothing to trap it. They're not wrapped in them, so they should have easily gotten out. And Russell Humphrey, he accurately predicted the diffusion rate based on 6,000 years. Okay, there was billions of years, there's another diffusion rate. And he sent it in, he made the prediction, and it fit perfectly on the 6,000 year model. Okay, now number 7, carbon-14 in fossils, coal, and diamonds. Those are all supposed to be millions of years old, if not billions of years old, and we find C14 in there. And carbon-14 can't last, it used to be 50,000 years, and now it's got, you can't find it, 50,000 years. But now they have new machines, and it might be up to 70,000. So if you find any carbon-14 in it, it's got to be less than 70,000. But we'll just say 100,000. All that stuff has to be less than 100,000. Even if every atom in the whole world were carbon-14, they would decay so quickly that no carbon-14 would be left on Earth after only 1 million years. And they had 70 samples from coal, oil, and natural gas and marble, and they were all in the thousands. So carbon dating is the creationist friend. But their rescuing device is, it's contamination. That's what they'll always say, it's contamination. Yeah, but when they it doesn't matter which layer the coal is taken out of, it's all got pretty much the same amount of C14. If it was contamination, it should be random. And then they also tested the instruments with blank samples, and they yielded zero radiocarbon. So there can't be any contamination. All right, and number 8, short-lived comets. They can't survive billions of years. I've heard people say, because they can run, they know the orbits, they know the planets, and Jupiter's the big comet killer. They're about, I've heard 10,000, maybe 100,000 years, all those comets are going to be gone because of Jupiter. It's a big broom sweeping out those things. They can't survive billions of years. So why do we still have them? Well, the rescuing device is an Oort cloud. They're being made out in the outer solar system, 30 to 50,000 astronomical units away, and an astronomical unit is from here to the sun. So it's way out there. It's never been observed. It's never been measured, but it has to be there because we have comets. And that was one of the predictions that Kevin Lee told the NASA scientist who was in charge of getting stuff back from the comet. He said, you're going to find stuff from the Earth in that comet. And he said, no, we're going to find stuff from the Oort cloud in that comet. And he was shocked and dismayed to find stuff from the Earth. Yeah, so that hydroplate theory, that makes a lot of good predictions. And then number 9, very little salt in the sea. That's what a woman said yesterday. She put under 6,000, or Tuesday, at the VOTEC. She stroked under 6,000. I said, why'd you put it there? She said, because I've done my research. And I said, like what? And she said, there's not millions of years of salt in the sea. And I thought, good for you. You're right. There's not. Today's ocean saltiness would be reached in only 42 million years. Only about 1/70th the 3 billion years that ocean's supposed to be there. And then the rescuing device is that the inputs had to be less and outputs greater. So they have to imagine everything that's different than today, which is really interesting because they used to have uniformitarianism, which is you could only use today to explain the past. So they're just talking out of their mouth on each side of their mouth. But that's what they do. Okay, and then number 10, ancient DNA in ancient bacteria. They were shocked that the bacteria was very similar to modern bacteria DNA. Yeah, they were shocked. After 250 million years, there should have been some changes. And that's what this guy did, Carl Werner, the guy at the beginning. There's living fossils. His theory was if evolution is false, the modern animals would look identical to the fossil ancestors. And here's a whole book of living fossils. They look identical to their fossil ancestors. The only difference is the fossils tend to be bigger. We either find animals that are alive or animals that are extinct in the fossil record. No transitional anything. And then the scientists were surprised to find that the DNA was still intact after the supposed 250 million years because it normally breaks down quickly. What's the rescuing device? It was contamination from modern bacteria. They just, say something and ignore it because it really doesn't support their belief system. And then we've got a couple more here. This is the recession of the moon. The moon is moving farther away about 1.5 inches every year. Okay, so a few thousand, 6,000 years, that's about 800 feet. But if it's supposed to be there billions of years, now you got a problem. Because eventually that at about 1.5 billion years, it would have been touching the Earth. And then once it's touching the Earth, why would it ever leave? And they can't even explain how the moon got there. They got 4 theories and none of them work. The nebula theory, it all came from the same gas cloud, but the elements in the isotopes are too different, so that doesn't work. It got spun off of the Earth because the Earth was going so fast. Well, if that's the case, well, it can't spin that fast. But if that's the case, the moon should be going around our equator, and it's not. It's going around on the same plane as we're orbiting the Earth. And then they had the capture one, where we just captured the moon, which is really difficult to do. You either get going really fast and they slingshot around each other, or they slam into each other. And if you do capture it, it's going to have this really oblong orbit. But ours is pretty circular. And then they had the collision theory. Something slammed into the Earth and it broke off. Well, that would have vaporized a lot of the elements and chemicals that are in the moon. And so one guy said, and he's a secularist, he said, the best way to explain how the moon is observational error. It doesn't exist. They can't explain it's there, so they just, maybe it doesn't exist. But this is what, do they think they tell that to the kids in the textbook? No, they just say it's moving 1.5 inches farther away each year. And don't ask questions. And that's what I'm trying to get the kids at the Votech especially to start doing, is ask questions. How did life begin? Where did matter come from? Because that'll help the whole class realize they can't answer it. They can't answer it. Okay, number 12, do ice cores show many tens of thousands of years? And I throw that in there because a couple of weeks ago, that's what they brought up. These annual ice rings, hundreds and thousands of these ice rings. And so I brought up the Lost Squadron. And I learned all this from Kent Hovind. Anybody ever heard of Kent Hovind? Yeah, it changed my life. And on Tuesday, I was talking to another guy, changed his life too. He watched all the debates and stuff. So a lot of these are his slides, his experience. Because these people, this is in Denver, they got those, they drill those have those ice cores, supposed to have these annual rings, and yet, they're supposed to be annual, but yet there's this Lost Squadron. Back in World War II, they ran out of gas, they had to do a landing on a glacier, or in Greenland. The first plane came down with his wheels, and he did rolling. So the next guys came down without their wheels and just landed on their bellies and just came to a stop. And then they hiked out of there, and that was 40-some years. And then 40-some years later, somebody wanted to get them out. And they thought, well, just brush off the snow and go fly them away. These things were under 270 feet of ice. And Kent Hovind asked him, how can you have hundreds of layers of ice above something that's been there 45 years. And the guy says, those aren't annual rings. Those are just warmer, colder rings. Warmer, colder. Also, we bring up the tree rings. You can listen to this on Real Science Radio, rsr.org. And they say that the tree rings prove that we've been here over like 4,000 or 6,000 years past the age of the flood, because the flood was roughly 4,400 years ago. And Bob Enyart never really knew how to answer that. He thought maybe there's more rings per year than one, but he wasn't sure until this guy. This is in creation.com, evidence there are multiple ring growth per year in bristlecone pines. They simulated a drought for 2 weeks and then put the roots back in water and it produced a ring. So you can have multiple rings per year. And we need to understand that the tree ring data is not very solid. And yet they're using that for global warming, some of that stuff. Okay, now I said yesterday I'd talk about about Niagara Falls, and this is from Kent Hovind. Basically, the falls are eroding at about 4 or 5 feet a year. Okay, and Charles Lyell went there. He said no, because that would give the age about 9,000 years or so. Charles Lyell went there and said, no, it's going much faster, maybe 1 foot a year, even though he didn't even stay there a year. And so that'd be 30,000 years. They're doing everything to put it outside the biblical timeline, but you can do the research on that. But the interesting thing about Niagara Falls is it's U-shaped. And it's U-shaped because the middle part of a river goes faster, therefore it erodes more there. And I was a kayaker. I know that, but I never connected that with the waterfall, and so they're U-shaped like that. Now you see a picture of Horseshoe Falls, which is about 1/2 mile across. And when you add the American side and the Canadian side, it's about 3/4 mile across. But if you search Dry Falls, which is in Idaho, it's 3.5 miles. It's 5 times or more across. Huge, huge waterfall, and it's dry. There's nothing going over it. So at one point in time, there was a whole bunch of water, and I think his name was Bentz, that figured out there was a glacier lake that went through, that it breached, and all that water came down at one time. And they ridiculed him and made fun of him because that wasn't uniformitarianism. And he was about 97 when he finally got recognized, and they got a prize for being a good geologist. And he says, yeah, but everybody, I can't rub their face in it anymore because they're all dead. And sometimes science progresses one funeral at a time. That's how, and I've seen it in my lifetime. You get people in their old entrenched ways and they don't want to look at anything new because that's all they know. And that's how science progresses. Oh, and this one too, the Mississippi River, this just boggles my mind. Mississippi River deposits sediments at a rate of 80,000, not pounds, 80,000 tons, not a year, not a day, every hour. 80,000 tons every hour. And that Gulf of Mexico should be all full by now, but it's not. And so they say, and it says there's about 30,000, they've done research, they think there's about 30,000 years of sediment there. And they say, see, the Bible's wrong. It's longer than the 6,000. Well, you're not accounting for the flood when there was a whole bunch of water gushing off of there. All right, so what did we do tonight besides thank you for the technical wizard there. Let's give that guy a hand. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, we appreciate that. I apologize for not having that. It worked yesterday at the Votech. I thought it would work here. But what did we do? We looked at thousands of years based on the Bible, and we don't have any rescuing devices. Then we looked at billions of years based on blind chance, and we got rescuing devices for almost everything. So what do we want to put our faith in? And that's kind of why we do this. This is also a Grace Campus Fellowship event, so we like to tie it. This is what Jesus said in John 3:12. If I have told you earthly things and you believe not, how shall you believe if I tell you of heavenly things? And Jesus said, but from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. The beginning. So Jesus was a creationist. Not only was he a creationist, he was a young earth creationist. It wasn't millions or billions of years later. And then John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. So it's a real simple way. God so loved the world. See, we have a problem. We have a sin that needs to be paid for. Okay, and that needs to be paid. The wages of sin is death, It's not confession or penance, it's death. We need somebody to pay for it, and that's why Jesus came. There's a gift of eternal life that's bought and paid for by Jesus Christ. So just think of it this way. This is you and me in the world, and this is Jesus and God. We got a sin nature here, folks. God loves us, but he hates our sin because it separates us from him. And so this needs to be paid for. That's why Jesus came. He was on the cross. He paid for all our sins. He was buried and he rose again, proving he was God, validating everything he said. And he says, if you believe I did that for you, you have everlasting life. And that's what we want, to tie God's creation to God's Bible so people can go to heaven. And I meet a lot of scoffers at Earth, at the college, and some that don't believe the Bible. Oh, it's all billions of years. And so we have conversations. And I was talking to, 3 weeks ago, I was talking to a psych major. And we were having a really good conversation. I said, you know, if you saw a blind person walking towards a cliff, would you warn them? And he said, yeah. And I said, that's why I'm here. There's a lot of people walking towards the cliff of hell, and they can walk over it if they want, but they're going to have to walk by me first. They aren't going to say they didn't know. Okay. And so with that, I think we've covered it. Oh, these are the things coming up. Tuesday, 7 o'clock. That's the location of Mount Sinai, tccsa.tc. The Ark in the Darkness, that's Thursday. I think it's just Wednesday here in town. And then the Creation Conference. And so with that, I'm going to hand you over to Lynn, and he's going to have something for you, I believe. So thank you so much. I appreciate that. And they'll say, you know, the Bible is not a science book, and you're right. Thank God for that, or we'd have to get a new one every year or two. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and the Bible, it does tell us, it gives us a framework for biology. Everything produces after their kind, after their kind, after their kind. It even says the seed is in itself. These are biological statements found in chapter 1. And that's what we find when we go outside those doors. You know, evolution says everything produces something other than their kind given enough time. And we never see that. So that's biology. Geology is, there's a flood. The layers of sedimentary rock and the fossils are a sign of a flood and not millions of years. So that's geology. Astronomy is God created it. You know, every time they look back in the Hubble Deep Field Image and the James Webb Space Telescope, they're always predicting they're going to see these young universes being formed. And the creationists always say, no, you're not. We haven't been here that long. And the creationists are always right. Now we're getting to the point where Jason Lyle, he actually predicted they're wrong. And once they realize they're wrong, I predict they're going to say that galaxies formed sooner than expected. And he was right both times. So then there's anthropology, the study of man. You know, how did we get here? If evolution's true, you got a master race that Hitler said. You know, it's the survival of favored races, which is the subtitle of the Natural Selection, Darwin's book. But what does the Bible say about that? No, that's Genesis 11. That's the Tower of Babel. That's when you get the God confounding the languages, and then he scatters them across the face of the earth, and isolated groups get dominant features, and we're all the same. God's there's no respecter of persons. You know, we're all of one blood. Nobody's any better. We're all sinners who need a Savior. And that's one of the things that I knew a guy from Nepal. And Nepal has a lot of Hindus. And he liked Christianity because we're all the same. And Hindus, they got a caste system. They got the Brahmins, they got the untouchables, and he didn't like that. He liked that we were all the same. And so my thing is, you know, and you look at the mess over in Israel and Gaza, I wish somebody would go over there and say, you know what, you guys both need Jesus Christ. You know, that's where the real peace comes from. You both need Jesus. And you know, it could be a good witnessing opportunity. Any other questions? Right. See, they can't have people thinking, and I'll talk to the students, you know, did this building get put together by chance? No, it's absurd. Well, how much more absurd is it to think your body got put together by chance? Well, and I was talking to a student today, I mean, just think about it. If you can get rid of God in the science class, now who's in charge? The government, right? So you got government schools telling you that there's no God, so now they're in charge, right? And so that's our tax money. So what we need to do is start just grassroots, you know, share this. This stuff will show up on YouTube and stuff.